This wasn't a normal congressional hearing. It didn't start like one, it didn't feel like one, and by the time it ended, it definitely didn't look like one. Because instead of the usual back and forth questions, something completely different happened. Jasmine Crockett walked in, took her time, looked directly at the room, and made it clear she wasn't even going to play the game. No standard questions. No polite setup. No slow build. Just a direct signal that she believed the entire process in front of her was already broken.
In September.
Without objection, the gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And to be clear, I'm not going to ask any questions of this witness because this witness has revealed that she has no intentions of answering questions. But instead, I'm going to ask some very basic questions really quickly of my colleague, Becca Ballant, if she will answer right or wrong, raping children.
Wrong.
Right or wrong, killing random citizens.
Definitely wrong.
Right or wrong, enriching yourself as the sitting president of the United States.
Definitely wrong.
Okay, thank you, because I probably never would have got that with our witness. Our witness who somehow is a lawyer but does not understand how it works with witnesses. I'm not really sure what law school she went to and what all kind of cases she tried, but typically when you come into a space and somebody's a witness, then they sit there and they answer questions instead of asking questions. And then we also have this objection that we use as lawyers called non-responsive when a witness fails to actually answer the question. But nevertheless, let me address the survivors because that's exactly who they are. They are not victims, they are survivors. Let me say thank you for having more courage and moral clarity in your pinky fingers than the entire Department of Justice. We are currently the laughing stock of the world, partially because of the failed leadership within the DOJ as we see kings and queens falling everywhere around the world. But we don't know the basics of right and wrong in this country because it's not about partisanship. And that's why I applaud Thomas Massie, because he's the only person on the Republican side that has a backbone and knows how to stand up to corruption. But nevertheless, let me keep going. My Democratic colleagues have been attacked this entire committee hearing. They have been lied on. And frankly, the American people weren't looking for that. They were looking for answers about the corruption that they see coming from this administration. In the written testimony of this witness, of this particular witness, she stated that when she took office, she had two main goals. The first was to end the weaponization of justice, and second, to return the department to its core mission. Not only have you lied about both, you've intentionally done the exact opposite. You're spending more taxpayer resources arresting journalists than you are prosecuting pedophiles and creeps. In fact, your boss, the President of the United States, stated that this administration, quote, took the freedom of speech away. And at your direction, DOJ has arrested Don Lemon and Georgia Fort. And I might add that y'all actually had a judge that rejected y'all for trying to arrest Don Lemon before, just like the grand jury rejected y'all as it relates to Senator Kelly, just like a grand jury rejected y'all as it relates to Senator Slotkin, just like the case against Tish James was dismissed and the case against Mr. Comey was dismissed. I completely don't get how it is that you're sitting at the top of DOJ because you don't seem to be good at your job. You're spending more taxpayer resources arresting these journalists. In fact, we know after Georgia Fort and Don Lemon were arrested, we know that there were homes of journalists that were raided. We know that threatened prosecution against students protesting your actions and forced tech companies to remove apps used to track ISIS activities. But let's circle back to you protecting pedophiles and creeps, because I want to talk about the president and his possible involvement with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, I don't know what the president might have done with Jeffrey Epstein, but unlike this administration, I believe that facts matter, so let's talk about the facts. Fact number one, Donald Trump is one of the most named people in the Epstein files. At least 5,000 files contains more than 38,000 references to Trump, his wife, or Mar-a-Lago. Fact number two, Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell made young girls available to Trump on multiple occasions. For example, according to this file, Ghislaine Maxwell presented a young girl to President Trump who spent more than 20 minutes apparently flirting with her. Here's another example. This shows notes from FBI investigators that describe Jeffrey Epstein transporting a victim to Mar-a-Lago to meet with President Trump, where he bragged to Trump that, quote, this is a good one. Now, I'm not saying that the president is a pedophile, but there is a lot of evidence in these files that suggests that he's very close friends with a lot of men who are pedophiles. What's crazy about all of this is just that this is a big cover-up. And this administration is engaged in it. In fact, this administration is complicit. But there are numerous others, like how the DOJ is attempting to obstruct justice in the investigation of the rogue agents who have murdered American citizens, or how the DOJ seized voter data from Fulton County in an attempt to steal the 2026 midterm elections, or how federal agents have Tom Homan on tape accepting a bribe and your agency killed the investigation, or how your agency is ready to give the president a $230 million payday, which is unconstitutional. The Constitution is clear. The president shall not receive any payment except his salary while in office. The fact of the matter is that you will be remembered as one of the worst attorney generals in history. An attorney general who has prioritized obstruction over justice, corruption over the law, fealty to the president over loyalty to the Constitution. And Mr. Chairman, I will yield.
Gentlelady yields. Gentleman from Missouri is recognized, excuse me, gentleman from Kansas, the Attorney General, former Attorney General, Mr. Schmidt is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and General Bondi, thanks for being here. Did you have anything you wanted to say before we talk?
I do. Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, my friend, for many years. I find it interesting that she didn't even want to try, Congresswoman Crockett, to ask any questions, because she certainly did not condemn her leader, Hakeem Jeffries, for taking money from Jeffrey Epstein after Epstein was convicted. And I will be brief to give you your time, Congressman. This is what she didn't want to talk about. Texas, from Cuba, convicted, homicide, arson, weapon offense.
Convicted.
You know,
So what we
Estrada,
talking about? Convict
Texas,
some of these
convicted,
perpetrators that
homicide.
rape these women that are
Chairman,
sitting
time
behind you,
time
that
belongs
you
to the
refuse
gentleman
to even
from
acknowledge
Kansas.
they are here.
Time belongs to the
Texas.
gentleman from Kansas.
Mr. Chairman, could I have a few seconds
You
back
bet,
to make
you
up
bet.
for the yelling? Thank you. General, did you have anything
Congress.
further to say?
Texas, convicted of homicide. Cecil Joseph, from Dominican Republic. Texas, convicted for kidnapping, rape. Khalid Khan, from Afghanistan. That's why they want to talk about Epstein and not what's happening in their own states.
Thank you, General, and thank you for being here. And this has been quite a spectacle to observe today. I think it's sad. I ran for Congress because I thought we had serious problems in this country we wanted to try to fix together. And this performance today, not yours, General, but some of my colleagues, has not shored up my confidence that we are up to the task. You and I served together for 8 years when you were Attorney General of Florida and I in Kansas. You served professionally. I'm glad to be able to serve with you in these new roles, and
And what happened next turned a routine oversight hearing into one of the most talked about political moments tied to the ongoing storm around Jeffrey Epstein and the Department of Justice. Because instead of questioning Pam Bondi directly, Crockett did something that instantly shifted the tone. She turned to another lawmaker and started asking the simplest questions imaginable. Not legal questions, not political traps, just basic moral ones. Right or wrong, good or bad. The kind of questions that don't need a law degree to answer. And that was the point. In just a few seconds, she reframed the entire hearing away from legal technicalities and into something much more uncomfortable: moral clarity. It was a setup, but not the kind people were expecting. Because instead of trying to catch Bondi in a contradiction, she was trying to show the audience that getting a straight answer at all might be impossible. And that's where the tension started building fast. Because once you reduce everything down to simple right and wrong, there's nowhere to hide behind technical language. There's no room for carefully crafted legal responses. Either something is wrong, or it isn't. And Crockett made sure that everyone watching understood exactly what she was doing. She wasn't just asking questions. She was building a contrast. A contrast between how easy it is to acknowledge basic wrongdoing and how difficult it seemed to get direct answers from the person sitting in front of her. But that was just the beginning. Because once that contrast was established, Crockett pivoted immediately. No pause, no reset. She turned her focus straight toward Bondi, and the tone shifted from controlled to confrontational. Not in a chaotic way, but in a deliberate, calculated way. She questioned the idea that the witness was even engaging in good faith. She pointed out what she described as non-responsiveness, something any lawyer would recognize instantly. And in doing so, she wasn't just criticizing answers. She was questioning credibility itself. Then came the moment that raised the stakes even higher. Instead of staying in the realm of procedural criticism, Crockett addressed the survivors directly, not as victims, but as survivors. That distinction mattered. It reframed the conversation again, pulling it away from politics and into something deeply human. She thanked them, praised their courage, and in the same breath criticized the very institution that was supposed to represent justice. That shift wasn't accidental. It was designed to make the contrast even sharper. On one side, individuals who came forward. On the other, a system she was accusing of failing them. And just when it seemed like the moment couldn't escalate further, she brought up the issue that continues to hover over everything, the Epstein files. But she didn't present it as a closed case. She didn't claim definitive conclusions. Instead, she leaned into something more powerful for public perception: the volume of references, the existence of documented notes, and the idea that there are still unanswered questions. She made it clear that she wasn't claiming a conviction. She was pointing to patterns, associations, and documents that, in her view, demand deeper scrutiny. That distinction is important, because there's a massive difference between proving something in court and raising enough questions to keep public attention locked in. And Crockett understood that. She wasn't trying to win a legal argument in that moment. She was trying to shape a narrative, one where the presence of names and documents, repeated mentions, and recorded associations are enough to justify continued investigation. She referenced reports and investigative notes, including mentions involving high-profile figures, and framed them carefully, not as proven facts of wrongdoing, but as part of a larger picture that, in her words, couldn't just be ignored. And that's where the room shifted again. Because once those references were brought into the conversation, the pressure wasn't just on answering questions anymore. It was on explaining why those questions hadn't already been answered. But what happened next is what really drove the reaction online. Because instead of directly engaging with those specific points, Bondi pivoted. She redirected the conversation toward unrelated crimes, focusing on broader law enforcement issues. Now, from a strategic standpoint, that kind of pivot isn't unusual. Politicians do it all the time. Shift the focus, change the frame, move the conversation into safer territory. But in this moment, with the context already set, that pivot didn't land the way it might have in a different setting. Because when one side is laying out specific references and asking for clarity, and the other side responds with a completely different topic, it creates a perception, whether intentional or not. And that perception is what drives viral moments. It's not always about what's legally accurate. It's about what people see and how they interpret it in real time. And that interpretation was already leaning in one direction. Crockett had framed the entire hearing as a test of accountability. So when the conversation moved away from the Epstein-related points, it didn't feel like a neutral shift. To many watching, it felt like avoidance. Again, that doesn't automatically mean it was. But perception doesn't wait for legal nuance. It moves faster than that. Crockett didn't let the moment fade either. She expanded her criticism beyond just one issue. She accused the Department of Justice of prioritizing the wrong things, of focusing resources on journalists and political battles instead of pursuing powerful individuals tied to serious allegations. Those are heavy claims. And again, she didn't present them as proven conclusions. She framed them as concerns, as accusations, as part of a broader pattern she believes exists. And that's where the hearing turned from a single confrontation into something much bigger. Because once you move from one case to a pattern of behavior, the implications change. It's no longer just about what happened with Epstein. It becomes a question about how the system operates as a whole, about whether justice is applied evenly or selectively. Bondi, on the other hand, stayed consistent in her approach. She pushed back by reframing the criticism as partisan, suggesting that the attacks were politically motivated. That's a common defense in high-stakes hearings. Shift the focus from the content of the accusation to the intent behind it. But again, in this specific context, with the audience already primed by Crockett's framing, that defense didn't fully neutralize the impact, because the conversation wasn't happening in a vacuum. It was happening in front of an audience that has been following the Epstein story for years. An audience that has seen documents released, names mentioned, and questions remain unanswered. So when legal language like "no prosecutable evidence" is used, it doesn't always land clearly. To the public, that can sound like nothing happened, even though legally it means something very different. And that gap between legal meaning and public perception is where moments like this explode. Because Crockett leaned into that gap. She emphasized the existence of references, the volume of documents, and the idea that those alone should trigger deeper investigation. Bondi emphasized legal standards, prosecutorial thresholds, and broader law enforcement priorities. Both approaches make sense from their own perspectives, but they operate on completely different levels. Point one speaks to the court of law. The other speaks to the court of public opinion. And in viral moments, it's usually the second one that wins. That be why the time Crockett delivered her closing remarks, the tone was set. She didn't soften it. She didn't walk anything back. She made a direct statement about how she believes Bondi will be remembered, not as a neutral figure, but as someone who, in her view, prioritized loyalty over accountability. That wasn't a subtle line. It was designed to stick, designed to be quoted, clipped, and shared, and it worked. Because moments like that aren't just about what happens in the room. They're about what happens after. The clips, the headlines, the debates that follow. And this one had all the elements needed to spread fast. Conflict, high stakes, recognizable names, and unresolved questions. But here's the part that keeps this story going even after the hearing ends. None of the underlying issues have been resolved. The documents Crockett referenced are still part of a larger, incomplete picture. The Epstein case itself remains one of the most controversial and talked about investigations in recent history. And every time it comes back into the spotlight, it brings the same question with it. Are we seeing the full story? Because once something is entered into the congressional record, it doesn't just disappear. It becomes part of an ongoing conversation. And whether those references lead to further investigation or not, the fact that they were raised publicly ensures that the pressure doesn't go away. And that pressure is exactly what this moment amplified. It wasn't just about one exchange. It was about trust. Trust in institutions, trust in investigations, trust in the idea that powerful people are held to the same standards as everyone else. When that trust starts to crack, even slightly, moments like this don't just get attention. They get traction. So now the focus shifts to what happens next. Will there be deeper independent reviews of the materials that were mentioned? Will more documents be released? Or will this become another moment that generates headlines and then slowly fades without clear resolution? Because that's the pattern people are watching for. Not just what is said, but what follows. And right now, the answer to that question is still unclear. What is clear is that the Epstein case continues to reach into the highest levels of power, at least in terms of public discussion and speculation. And every time it does, it reignites the same tension between legal standards and public expectations, between what can be proven and what people believe deserves further scrutiny. Crockett's approach in this hearing made that tension impossible to ignore. By stripping away the complexity and focusing on basic moral questions, she forced the conversation into a space where legal nuance feels less satisfying, where people want clear answers, not careful wording. Bondi's response, grounded in legal framing and broader context, represents the other side of that tension. The side that deals with standards of evidence, prosecutorial limits, and the realities of how cases are built. Both perspectives exist for a reason. But when they collide in a public setting like this, the result is rarely calm. It's moments like this that shape public perception far more than lengthy reports or detailed legal filings. Because most people don't read those. They watch moments. They react to exchanges. They form opinions based on what they see and hear in real time. And what they saw here was confrontation without resolution. Questions without clear answers. Claims met with deflection, at least in appearance. And that combination is what keeps a story alive. Whether you believe Crockett was exposing something real or simply creating a powerful narrative, one thing is undeniable. She understood exactly how to capture attention. And in today's media environment, attention is everything. Because once people are paying attention, they start asking their own questions. They start digging deeper, looking for more information, comparing statements, revisiting past reports. And that process doesn't stop just because the hearing ends. If anything, it's just beginning. And that's why this moment matters. Not because it provided definitive answers, but because it ensured the questions wouldn't go away. It added fuel to an already ongoing conversation. A conversation about accountability, transparency, and whether the truth, whatever it is, will ever fully come to light. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is really about. Not just one hearing, not just one exchange, but the larger issue of whether the systems in place are working the way people expect them to. And right now, based on reactions to this moment, a lot of people aren't so sure. If you want to stay updated on stories like this, where power gets questioned and moments like these unfold in real time. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the like button, because we break down the biggest hearings, the most intense confrontations, and the moments that everyone is talking about. And trust me, this story isn't over yet.